There, it's Mr. Tush. We're starting our work in current issues, and we're going to start with a scavenger hunt. But before we even get into that, we're going to be doing globalization and the global issues first. We're going to get to local issues soon. But before we start asking you what are the things you care most about, I really wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about what globalization is. And I want to thank Mr. Clemens for some really terrific slides on this. I didn't reinvent them because I thought these were perfectly fine. So let's talk about what globalization is. Now, globalization is you're talking about whether an issue is a global issue or a local issue. A global issue is something that occurs in two or more countries, then it becomes global. And it affects large numbers of people, entire nations, or big cross sections of them. And the problems are ongoing. If something occurs just inside of one country, or one state or one city, that is a local issue. Problems affect smaller numbers of people. I should have said smaller there. When you say small numbers, some people think it's 10, and it might affect 10. It might affect everybody in Connecticut. That on a global scale is still small. In either case, you see where it says problems are continual in both of these? That's important to note. That problems are continual. If it's an issue, it's an ongoing problem. Now, what is globalization? So two or more countries or cultures, they start working together. And so they start to interconnect in a lot of different aspects of life, how their culture interacts, business, which is probably the most common outcome of globalization, but also cultural communications. And of course, government interactions are pretty significant. And what it does is it tends to reduce the differences between the countries. We've always been, as a country, interacting with Europe a great deal. So that's why many people in America do appear that way. We've had interactions now more and more with Latin America. So we're becoming a much more Latinized country. As you see these changes happen, the nature of the American culture and the American society will continue to evolve. Now, why did it happen? Well, the main reason it happens is people need something they don't have. So they go looking for it. And when you go looking for it, you can either steal it and risk a war, you can fight someone and risk a war, or you can find a way to work with them. So maybe you have resources they don't, and you trade and it works. So if you have limited local resources, like, Japan has always had to go searching for oil somewhere else. America had to go looking for oil somewhere else because we had too many cars and not enough domestic oil. You take a look at farming. Island nations like Japan, again, don't have nearly as much farming as they do in China. So they have to interact with countries that do a lot of farming to get some of the things that they need imported. Some of the reason people globalize is to explore or create. They want to kind of see what's out there. We are, as intellectuals, curious people. If you think about that notion of globalization, I think the biggest thing to look at is in the late 50s, really into the early 60s, President Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, and we did, because we're hardwired to go explore. There's also a pretty perpetual need for taking over other countries. We want more power, we want more stuff, so we go take it from someone else. And unfortunately, particularly a lot of European countries, but it's been around for a long time, there is a habit of other countries taking over other countries. Now, it happened as things developed. The first thing that happened, for example, was communication. People could communicate other than by walking over to your neighbor. When humanity was first evolving, you could talk to the people who were in your cave with you. And then they found other ways to communicate through messages and hieroglyphics and et cetera, and common languages made the world a little bit bigger, and in that regard smaller, because you could communicate with far away. Then things like the telegraph came about, and the mail system, it's not mentioned here, the mail system has done a lot to shrink the world. The telephone, and then the internet. The internet shrunk the world overnight. The internet was an extraordinary development in shrinking the world. Transportation, it became easier and easier. First we invented the wheel, then we domesticated the horse, and we did a lot of things, and then we invented cars and planes and trains and found ways to get places. The Romans did it first. They took over the world, and the first thing they did, starting in Rome, they went as far as Ireland and England. So they went very, very far away. And they did it, and every place they took over, they built roads. And so everything became smaller. So even if you managed to beat the Romans back, or as they eventually left, they left roads behind. and boats and canals. All this transportation, globalization changed it. Money, because people didn't always find it easy to trade and barter. So on a country level, you can't necessarily always trade, cargo ships of corn for cargo ships of oil. So you have the interconnectivity of money, coin and paper money, and the idea of converting. We've decided a dollar is worth 2.7 pounds. And so therefore we can immediately trade things with Great Britain. And if it's worth 2.6 euro, we now can trade with the rest of the European Union. This kind of stuff was happening. Some key vocabulary to note: when you hear the word migration, that means people are going from one place to another. Politics or political issues has to do with the government. So if we use the words political, that's that. If you say economics or economy or economic development, that's money. Discrimination, that's where you get into matters of race. Race itself is superficial. The only race we have on this planet is the human race. But there was a lot of, related to the politics and the economics, there was a whole body of sociological writings that came about that said people who have different skin colors are different, and people who have different physical features are different. And we've, of course, learned that physical differences are far more a product of where you live than anything else. And they're surface only, really. Sustainability, to avoid the depletion of natural resources to maintain environmental balance. So, meaning we're gonna, for all the paper we use, we're gonna keep planting trees. Biodiversity, you can't grow one crop. You need to grow a lot of crops. Renewable resources. This is stuff that can replace itself, and it's got some examples here: wood and wind and sun. In other words, wind can produce electricity, but there's always more wind. And then non-renewable resources are things that once you take it, they don't come back. Oil and coal, you take them out of the ground, for example, and oil will replenish itself in a few billion years, but that's not really replacing itself. Oil does not just replace itself. Coal, when that's gone, it's gone. So that's kind of the key pieces on global issues. Now let me go over your assignments so you see what's going on. I'm going to ask you to go on a little bit of a scavenger hunt. So right here on 1.2, I've asked you a bunch of fairly random questions. I've asked you things like, how is Israel doing with the coronavirus right now? Or how's it going in Puerto Rico with the hurricanes? And yes, Maria, but also what's going on there currently, because they're getting nasty weather. What effect did the pandemic have on global warming? So some interesting TikTok and coronavirus, a couple of coronavirus questions. There was a mine collapse in the Congo that could have economic impact. Are we headed for a trade war with China, and what's going on with economic and trade sanctions with China? Is child trafficking a concern, and where is it a concern? What we're going to ask you to do is just to explain these issues, just to tell me, answer these questions, and then tell me one of them. Pick one and say, why should we in Hartford care about this one issue? And if you decided that child trafficking is the one you talk about, why don't you give me 2 or 3 sentences about why we should care about this in Hartford? Or if you want to talk about, coronavirus or the mine collapse in the Congo, which, believe it or not, does have an impact on the United States. Talk about those things. Just give me 2 to 3 sentences on why we should care. So that'll take a little bit of doing, and you can work with your partners and share your research with each other. I have no problem with that, just so long as that's getting done, and of course staying socially distanced. Use the technology to be able to work with each other. When that's done, you click submit. The only other thing that will be here, of course, that's not there right now is this video once it's uploaded. If you have any questions, let me know. Good luck, and thank you. Where it's going next, I will share here. All right, talk to you later.